Hello, namaste, and welcome to the 2021 National Civic Leadership Forum. We have a diverse panel today to draw our attention to Asia's civilizational heritage that we don't talk about as often. We will explore how we, the Asian Americans, spice up the United States. And we'll also explore some ideas about how each one of us can and should celebrate our cultures. I'm your moderator, Rajiv Singh from the Hindu American Foundation, also known as HAF. HAF is an educational and advocacy organization that was established in 2003. It focuses on educating the public about Hindus and Hinduism and advocates for policies and practices that ensure the well-being of all people and the planet. Before I introduce you to our guests, I want to call out the excellent work that the technical team has done putting this production together. So please give them a hand. Now, to our guests, with me today, I have the pleasure of 5 excellent panelists joining me. Let me introduce you to them. First off, we have Angela Anand. Angela is the founder of South Asian Women's Network. Her passion for advocacy is well documented through Empowering Women and Girls conference that she organizes and has been doing so for multiple years. She has many firsts to her name. First elected to Central Committee of the Democratic Party of Orange County and served as secretary for the Democratic Party as well. First female president of National Federation of Indian American Associations, a 40-plus-year-old association. First South Asian elected chapter president of Women's in Communication and first coastal president of Penn Women Chapter. She was elected twice as the delegate of the Democratic Party National Convention. Angela has organized White House briefings and congressional lunches. She has also organized several special events, seminars, and conferences for professional and community nonprofit groups. Angela possesses a master's degree in economics and a diploma in journalism, and is an alumni fellow of CORO's Orange County Public Affairs Program. Next up, we have Jawad Khan. Jawad is the Chief Programming Officer at the Muslim Educational Trust, MET, and a member of MET's Board of Directors. He has spent 21 years with MET as a teacher, college counselor, and administrator. Before joining MET, Jawad worked in the high-tech industry, including Intel and Cavi corporations, before starting his own startup, AI Graphics, along with his classmates from college. Jawad was born in Houston, Texas, and has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Administration and Economics from Portland State University, and he currently resides in Beaverton, Oregon. Our next guest is Sheetal Shah. Sheetal is the Managing Director and Chief Financial Officer of the Hindu American Foundation. She oversees HAF's member communication, marketing, and social media presence. Sheetal is a longtime Ashtanga yoga practitioner and was instrumental in the development of HAF's Take Back Yoga campaign, which aims to highlight yoga's roots in Hinduism. We have with us today Haipei Shui. Haipei is the founding president of United Chinese Americans, UCA, a leading national coalition of Chinese community in North America. Haipei has been a community leader since his days as a graduate student from China at University of Wisconsin-Madison. He has lobbied the US Congress for several years on US-China trade issues and has successfully coordinated and orchestrated campaigns to pass legislation that impacts the Chinese American community. Haipei has promoted political participation of the immigrant Chinese community throughout the years. Haipei also has worked as a consultant for the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF. He has also successfully campaigned to stop the New River Dam building in China. He worked several years at the most popular Chinese TV base in Hong Kong as its resident world affairs commentator. We also have with us today Nadia Samalina. Nadia is the Vice President of Indonesian American Association. Prior to her current role, Nadia served as on the board of the IMAAM organization as its vice president from 2008 until 2013. She's passionate about amplifying the voices of youth, women, and the Indonesian American diaspora community. Originally from Jakarta, Indonesia, Nadia grew up in West Virginia. Nadia published an essay about her dual cultural experience, which was incorporated into the anthology Voices of the Asian American and Pacific Islander Experience, Volume 1. Nadia also has over 10 years of corporate manager experience from her work as a senior retail fraud manager. She holds a bachelor's degree in social science and a master's in accounting and financial management from the University of Maryland Global Campus. Folks, welcome and thank you for being here. Let's spend the next 30 minutes or so understanding each other better, and then we'll open up for Q&A from the audience. So let me first, before we have a specific conversation, maybe give about a minute each to our panelists for any opening remarks. Let us start with Angela Anand.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to everyone who is on the panel and share my background and heritage with all of you and others who are not here, but maybe listening to us. I was born in India, and I came to this country when I was young, 20-year-old. And at that time, I didn't have any idea about culture and identity. All I cared was whether I could get good scores, good admission, and finally get a good job. So when I arrived here, I saw people from different places, different cultures, and people talking about their cuisine, their dress, and asking me questions about my culture and my background. So I was at UC Davis, and I started to organize cultural events, fashion shows, and that was my passion at that time. But as time passes, I got more and more interested thinking about my own identity. Identity to me is when you are born, you observe things, the language that is spoken at home, the traditions we observe, and all the events that we try to participate. I saw how the food was cooked and how it was served. As a grown-up person, I started to talk about going to America and meeting people from diverse communities. When I reached here, I noticed that India had diversity. I never knew about it. I never talked about it. And I also noticed, even though the main religion is Hinduism, but there are people from our neighboring countries, Zoroastrian from Iran, Afghanistan. There are people from Nepal and Portuguese. They came there, Christians, and there were Buddhists. So that was, I started to think about diversity and inclusion and different culture and different heritage. So that is what I like to talk about it, that I had no idea about culture. I had no idea about heritage, but after reaching here, I started to think and value my heritage. Where I come from an old civilization, but I'm very proud of all Indians and India that has given us spirituality, respect for older and younger people, and compassion for those communities who are living on the fringes and need some support. So I look forward to speaking with all of you and learning about your background and your identity and how you identify yourself.
Thank you, Angela. Next up, we have Haipei Shui from the United Chinese Americans. Haipei, any opening remarks?
Thanks, Rajiv, for hosting us. As we all know, that by 2040 or maybe no later than 2045, America will become a majority minority country. in that big context, let's think about this. America also at the same time will become the world first globalized country, not just in terms of a trade and technology and those kind of things, but become the first globalized country in terms of ethnicity. What that means is that we are entering a brand new age with very complex cultures and identities as a part of the backdrop of this country. America, as we used to say, is a melting pot, but that saying was quite unfitting increasingly as the population become more diverse. And I think the next term this country has used a lot is called, we may not be a melting pot, but we are like a cultural mosaic. And that is a bit more fitting and accurate to the reality on the ground, right? We have never totally melting down different ethnicities in this country, nor should we. So when you get to the mosaic, it's getting better. But lately, I think in the last 20 years or so, the new term is we are looking like more like a salad ball. If America is a melting pot, then honestly, we don't need to have this conversation today, right? As all cultural characteristics are supposed to be melting down totally without a trace. But if America, the future of America, is a salad ball or something close to that, then that's the very meaning we should have this conversation today, and a lot more into the future. So in this salad ball, we not just have more room and space for some of our culture and identity stuff, but we actually have a civic and a spiritual duty. Have a civic and a spiritual duty to keep our cultures, identity, and a way of life, of course, under the general framework of this country and this culture in American culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Haipei. Next up, we have Sheetal Shah from Hindu American Foundation. Sheetal, you may be muted, but we would like to hear your opening remarks.
Thank you and namaste. It's a pleasure to be here. As Rajiv mentioned, I'm here on behalf of the Hindu American Foundation, and the Hindu American community is about 3 million strong here. And the Hindu American Foundation was formed because we needed somebody to represent the Hindu American community. When we were formed, our community had temples for worship. We had organizations that gave back to charity in India, because naturally most of the Hindu community has its roots there. And we also had cultural groups. But who was going to speak up for those of us growing up Hindu here in America? Who was going to ensure that our traditions and our practices were understood and represented accurately in school textbooks, in interfaith discussions, in policy circles, to the media? The Hindu American Foundation was formed to fill that gap, to ensure that we could easily meld our Hindu and our American identities. And for a long time, we started about 2 decades ago. And for a long time prior to that, and when we were first starting, Hinduism was largely kind of unknown. It was kind of there, but people didn't know much about it. I would say today, folks are much more aware of Hindu philosophy, largely because of the popularization of yoga. And I think it's here where our community has a role to play, because yoga has the power to unite, because it appreciates each individual, embracing both similarities and differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheetal. Let us now go to Nadia for her opening remarks. Nadia, you may be muted.
Thank you, sir. First and foremost, thank you so very much for having me here. It is such an honor. Thank you for Rajiv for moderating, and thank you for all of the esteemed guests for being here as well. I really look forward to hearing your stories and hope to learn from all of you too. My story is as an Indonesian American who came to America by way of her parents, my parents, being students in the university in West Virginia. So I didn't willingly come here per se, but I ended up growing up here and experiencing the life of a sort of third culture kid, so to speak. And in West Virginia, there weren't a great many Indonesians. I think I recall just being two Indonesians in my elementary school, middle school, high school, the other one being my sister. So from there, I realized the importance of having an organization and a community that could help me remember and always be able to hold on to that Indonesian culture. And so we can, so when I moved to DC, I became involved in a lot of the organizations like the Imam organization and the Indonesian American Association that I'm working with now. And our goal is to really empower and amplify the voices of the Indonesian American diaspora, mainly because we're still so grossly underrepresented, because we're still a burgeoning community. Unlike our Indian American counterparts, even Chinese American counterparts, we're still relatively small and we're still growing. And so there's a lot of growth that our community needs to go through, and we're going through the motions of understanding how to embrace the heritage as well as embrace the newly adopted cultures of the United States. And so again, from there, I realized the importance of having such conversations and keeping us aware of our own heritage and identities and so forth. So I thank you so very much again.
Thank you, Nadia. Let's go to Jawad for our final opening remark, and then we'll start our conversation.
Thank you so much, Rajiv, and thank you so much to Asian American Unity Coalition and to Civic Leadership USA. And to the National Civic Leadership Forum for allowing me and the Muslim Educational Trust to be part of this forum. And a lot of what's already been said, it's always very difficult to have the last opening remark because 95% of what I wanted to say has been covered so eloquently by everybody, but I will keep to your request for under 1 minute. At the Muslim Educational Trust, we have this melding, as was used before by one of the panelists, of cultures that are ingrained also with faith. Here at the Muslim Educational Trust in Metro Portland area, we have 45 different ethnicities who speak 72 different languages and dialects. And the idea of this rich cultural heritage that also straddles the line between religious identity and ethnic identity, and being a part and accepted, not only accepted as a part of American culture, but not that we are visitors, but that we are contributors. And what you outlined so well about the presentation and the conversation that we're going to have is that not visitors who are added on, but yet contributors and forming this culture that's here. It's an immigrant culture in the United States, whether people want to believe that or not. And the latest census data shows what the trends are going to be in 10, 20 years, what this country looks like. And we have so much to give. I was just talking with one of the co-chairs, Dr. Zhang, earlier about how I wish an organization like this was around and active when I was younger, growing up here in the United States. I was born in Houston, Texas. I've lived across the United States, and this idea of a unified voice, about voices that have so often been neglected because of, for one reason or another. And I hope we get to touch on some of that today, and some of the conference has been touching on that today. And I really look forward to this conversation. I'm glad everybody is here, and thank you so much again.
Well, glad to have you here, Jawad, and honored to have the 5 panelists today. As I was thinking about what is the most important thing we can talk with 5 individuals from such diverse backgrounds in about, 35, 40 minutes, it occurred to me that today's conversation is predicated on 2 seemingly contrary truths, small t truths. The first truth is that we are all Americans, but, and there's a big but, there's a second truth that we are all uniquely American. So as Haipe talked about the salad bowl or the great mosaic, while there is much in common between us, we also seek recognition of our cultural identities. So with that background, if I may go to Jawad first, with my question, Jawad, what do you see as the biggest gift, so to say, that your cultural background provides to America today?
Thank you, Rajiv. It's interesting because when I read this question that you had in mind for this discussion today, I first had to ask myself, well, how do I define my culture and what I see myself as? And I see myself as a Muslim, and I see myself as ethnically Indian. And so both of those, whether together or individually, have given so much and imbued this country so much, and then been part of adding to this country so much that it's very difficult to get into all of it in this brief time that we have, so all the other panelists can speak as well. But I wanted to discuss the fact that first, as a Muslim, I identify as Muslims from whether they're South Asian Muslims or Muslims from other parts of East Asia, Southeast Asia, West Asia, or Muslims in general. We think of all the way throughout history from the great explorer Zheng He. And I remember when I was young and taking classes about civilization, Western civilization, Eastern civilization, history, you would have left out great Asian contributions to humanity. And of course now it's to the United States. Someone like Zheng He, a great explorer who outdid many of the other explorers that when somebody asks somebody about great explorers, of course, Vasco da Gama, Christopher Columbus, et cetera, come to mind. But you had someone who did so much uniting areas, bringing cultures together, and yet you don't hear about this, but identify with this. And then you have the Persian poet Rumi, and in his philosophy, and in his poetry, his theosophy, his transcendental philosophy, he seems to have a string of beads through multiple poems and stories. But his main emphasis is about the unity of being. And many people, when we have the divisive rhetoric about Muslims, and especially post 9/11, you don't see this, but this was his faith that was the germ that created this. And when you look at Rumi's poetry, and it's imbued inside of Western culture, he was able to verbalize the personal and often confusing world of personal growth and development, but it was clear and direct. And when you read it, you could really think about and understand that he made it seem possible that people of vastly diverse faiths and cultures, as Angela was mentioning, can live together in harmony. So you see Rumi's poems, they're recited everywhere. They'll be recited in all houses of worships and churches, synagogues, Zen monasteries, street performances here in Portland, in New York. We see that. And, the other aspect is that Muslims came here to the United States far before many other people came here. A little known, unfortunately, that's lost in history, is so many of the first people who were enslaved, who were brought to the United States to work on the sugar plantations, they were West African, and what's today Nigeria and Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, Togo, they were Muslim, at least 40 to 50% of them. And we have this history that they were here and they contributed to the building of this country. And I identify with those people, a lost history that's unfortunately not talked about enough. And then from my own, aside from the Muslim faith that I identify with, my South Asian, my Indian heritage, my parents came here in 1970, 1972, right after the 1965, when the U.S. Immigration Nationalization Act redressed the historic discrimination against Asians, a sad history of bigotry, xenophobia, prejudice that was redressed. My parents came here, And next year will be my mother's, inshallah, her 50th anniversary in the United States. But we have also given so much, and this is another lost history that's not there. The East India Company brought slaves from India.
Yeah, speaking of lost history or history that is glossed over, and Angela kind of reminded us about how diverse and how vibrant things are in India, which we hear a lot about often. But I want to go back to Haipei for a second and understand a little bit about the Chinese culture and how that contributes to the United States beyond the feng shuis of the world. There's so much, and Jawad talked about it, there's so much that has been glossed over. So Haipei, tell us a little bit about how do the Chinese Americans contribute to the story of America?
Well, I'm aware that we have so many great panelists, and I need to keep it short. Love to talk more, but I have thought very hard about your wonderful questions. What are the gifts that we as an ethnic community has contributed to this country? I honestly think that in terms of Chinese culture and maybe by extension Asian cultures, it is our value, at least some of our values and way of life that is a unique gift to this country. I'll make a quick example for that. Because we all contribute in some way, and that really, to me, cultural identity, cultural diversity is basically what's part of the reason we live in this world. Imagine there's only one culture in this world, whatever that is. I don't think it's very exciting, right? So there is a very deep, actually even a moral responsibility that to make your culture and identity strong and unique and contributing to other people. Now, I can think of some very specific things in Chinese culture that may not necessarily be in Indian culture or in other cultures, and I'm more than eager to hear others speak on that. I have singled out a few things. For example, in Chinese culture, I mean, again, for example, people say, "Oh, love for family or hard work." All culture have that, right? It just every culture has a different emphasis on that. And that difference in emphasis and a degree makes all difference. For example, I'm going to say that China and the Chinese culture has a very unique way for respecting the elders. And it sometimes could come not good, right? You pay too much respect to elder, you lost your own autonomy, or too much respect into things like seniorities. But in general, if you are not going that far, respect for elders is such a value to me in my life. And we see this in the context of America. There is a part of American culture which is making fun of old people, your in-laws, and all of that. I know it's making fun, but it's I don't know, right? So things very specific on that. Another example, our emphasis on learning. I'm pretty sure many cultures has that, but in Chinese culture, it is such a central place, and there's such a central faith in learning, as if that learning can turn your whole life around. Learning can help you make your fortune. Learning can make you a better person. So that learning is so important. I think that's made us, not just Chinese, I think Asians in this country are doing well. I think many of us. But of course, when you push that to the extreme, that meritocracy to the extreme, right? Then we all come into, I think you all have come across in your community, the very hot political debate, the public policy debate on affirmative action in terms of college admission, right? It is a fair question. Are we pushing too much, or our progressive politics in this country is pushing their demerits too much. So these are very soul-searching thing in this environment, in a vibrant multi-ethnic democracy where we have to let each community and ethnicity have their share of the fruit of this society. So how does that sharing comes in terms of our superb,
Got it.
insistent emphasis on that, right? Things like Chinese moderation. So these are all relevant to our today's politics. The Chinese moderation is very much against the political polarity today. So I just gave a few examples. Thanks for the question.
Absolutely. And with that, I would want to go to understand a little bit from Nadia about how do you see Indonesian Americans adding to the fabric of America? I mean, the reason I ask this question is that every time I think about Indonesia, I think about the temples, I think about the islands, and as a tourist, I imagine myself there someday. But I'm sure there's much more to the story. So Nadia, educate us a little bit about that side, which is at least hidden to me, if you may please.
Thank you so very much, Rajiv, and thank you for sharing your stories as well, Haipei and Mr. Jawad. And in terms of how we can contribute, again, we are still relatively new and we're still a growing community. But I feel like one of the ways that Indonesians can contribute or can enrich the beauty and the wonder of this mosaic, like Haipei was saying, is bringing enlightenment to how diverse the Muslim population is. Like Jawad was saying, how in his community there's over 40 countries. Indonesia is the largest Muslim population in the world. And it's incredibly diverse. It has over 300 ethnicities, 300 languages, but yet we are able to come together to become Indonesia. And our national motto is Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, which means unity and diversity. But then at the same time, when we think of Indonesia or that area, we're always thinking of Bali or the islands. So we're not really thinking of the overall richness that Indonesia has to offer. Like my own self, even though I'm Indonesian, I also come from Sumatra and I come from Java. Sumatra has the largest matrilineal community in the entire world, which is the Minangkabau community, which is where my mother's family is from. So it's very huge. The matriarchal parts of it are very huge. Whereas my father is from Java, where there's a whole rich history with Hindu and then Buddhism as well. The Prambanan temples, the Borobudur temples are there. And then he also comes from that patriarchal part about it. But we are able to still come together because we're respectful of each other's heritage and backgrounds. And that allows us to become Indonesia. And I feel that if we have more representation in America and we amplify our voices more, we are able to bring a more understanding of, again, how diverse all of our cultures are. Like when we're Islam, Indonesia, India, and China, they're not a monolith. They're very, very diverse. I love learning about all the cultures here and how rich they are in history. China goes back thousands of years, as well as India, and as well as Indonesia, but we don't really hear about it because well, I know Indonesians, again, are still relatively new, but I feel there's that level of hesitancy because we're still relatively new. And I hope that a lot of us overcomes that and really utilize our voices to contribute more, like Jawad was saying, as contributors and not as visitors to the United States.
Thank you, Nadia. I would now like to play a bit of ping pong, maybe between Sheetal and Angela, because both of them identified themselves as Indians. In particular, Sheetal identified herself as Hindu American. She talked about yoga, and Angela has a lot of firsts to her name. So with that in mind, ladies, what do you think as an Indian, as a Hindu, as a yoga practitioner, an Ashtanga yoga practitioner, as a leader in community and the party and various women organizations, how do you see your background, your heritage, your culture being that force, that machinery behind what you do, so to say, be that energy behind what you do. So maybe we can start with Sheetal.
Yeah, sure. Again, thank you all. This discussion is fantastic, and it's so nice to hear about the complexities of everyone's stories. There's no story that's super easy, and there's always lots of winding roads and paths that go in, and the Hindu American story is no different. And I think what Nadia was saying speaks to the Hindu American journey earlier on, where we were new and there was a hesitancy of speaking up or explaining ourselves. It was more about just like fitting in and trying to get through. And I think over the past couple of decades, that has certainly changed. And I think for the better, because, I think the philosophy of Hinduism has a lot to offer, not just America, but the world, right? Our key concept is this idea of pluralism. So our scriptures talk about ekam sat vipra bodha vadanti. The truth is one, the wise call it by many names. So that each one of us, with our different likes and dislikes, our different personalities and our different cultures and backgrounds, not only connect with one another in our own ways, but connect with the higher, divine, in our own ways. And so, like I mentioned earlier, we talked about yoga, and many of you may recognize some of what I'm saying as what you've heard as the philosophy of yoga, which is Hinduism's greatest gift to the world. And of course, nobody needs to be Hindu in order to practice yoga, but the philosophy is certainly intertwined and rooted in Hindu philosophy. And according to this really rich and welcoming philosophy, each of us has this freedom to not only believe in God, but to know God. And regardless of which name we're going to call God, whether you want to call God Krishna or Christ or Allah, regardless of our religion or our community, our gender, our sexual orientation or age, we are part of this world family. In Hinduism, we call it Vasudeva Kutumbakam, right? Where the whole planet is one big family, and we share a responsibility to each other, to all living beings on the planet and to the planet itself. And in that, we all share this quality of divine oneness. And so we share this unity, not only in our diversity, but there's also unity in divinity.
Thank you, Sheetal. Angela?
I think our biggest asset is our spirituality. I am now realizing that all the cultural events happened in temples. The paintings, the sculpture, performing arts, visual arts, everything was happening in temples because people had so much faith that once you go to the temple, this is a place, sacred place, everything will fall into the proper category. I still remember as a young child, my older brother would go to Hanuman Mandir. I lived in New Delhi, the capital of India. And Hanuman Mandir would give sweets. And my whole motivation to go with him was so that I could eat sweets. I had no idea what was being said. So my motivation was different. However, I always felt at peace. So there was something, the serenity or something there that even though my motivation was different, but I would feel content. I would feel satisfied. I would feel if I was praying even to get good marks in my exams, it was being heard. So I think there is so much faith in India and the spirituality of India and sharing. Sheetal also made the point of sharing. Sikhism is a part of Hinduism, and their belief is that nobody should go hungry. In other words, there is a temple, it's called Harmandir Sahib in Amritsar, where 24 hours they serve langar. And it's so simple. You don't, everyone is sitting on the floor, so there is equality. Male, female, children, everyone, same food, very simply cooked, but no one, if they need a shelter or food, can go hungry. They can always go there and get fed. So the concept of sharing, concept of spirituality, those are greatest assets that we have gained. I'm realizing when I was raising my two children, they did not appreciate all these culture things, but now, on their own, they like to go to the Gurdwara, they like to go to the temple. Not when I ask them to go, but on their own. They're seeking truth, seeking some solutions, seeking some help. So that is our biggest contribution from India. Also, I am valuing how Taj Mahal was built, not only with the marble, but all the carving was done by powdering semi-precious stones and precious stones. So there was no dye used, except these gems were used. Ajanta and Ellora caves. These caves has beautiful carvings. There are many beautiful temples in south part of India. And then we have our Bollywood, the music and dance, the more modern version of music and dance from south of India and the east and the west. Now it's all getting mixed. And I think the fusion is even more interesting, even though we want to maintain our traditions and traditional music and dance. With the fusion, there is so much creativity. And right now in America, I think Indians have they have contributed so much. Most of the software companies are being headed by Indian American, and those CEOs are really generating a lot of profits, and the economy is really boosting because of their effort, because of their creativity, because of the innovation and the drive to excel. So that is our heritage, and we are so proud that most of our people, the discipline they gained at home has helped them to strive and achieve more in America for American economy. And America is also proud of Indian Americans and the heritage and the culture and the values they brought to the mainstream.
Thank you, Angela. We have folks about 15 minutes left. I would request the viewers to keep asking us questions. I see at least one question in front of me. But let me start by observing something which all of you talked about. Jawad talked about Rumi, and Nadia talked about the Sumatran matriarchal culture. Sheetal talks about yoga, and Haipei talks about the Chinese moderation, and Angela talks about spirituality. A common theme across all of these terms that you use, and I acknowledge that I'm cherry picking those, is that they are foreign, that they are not the product of America as we know it. And to that end, then I see this question come in from the audience. And the question is from Mary Small. And she says, white nationalists, white separatists argue that they should be allowed to maintain their identity and as well, including their offensive language and symbols. They actually use your argument to support their position. Do you support their position? Now, let me add my question to that as well. In addition to, do you support their position? What are you realizing what is the best approach as your individual work or as your organization's work? What is your role and what are your efforts to actually counter that narrative of the white supremacists or white nationalists as Mary is talking about? So maybe I can start with Nadia there.
Thank you. That's a very, very important question, actually, because I know that comes up a lot in a lot of communities. And I feel with respect to the white nationalist, I feel like if you're looking at it from that word only, I feel like you're gonna regard them as well as like a monolith. Like, you know, whereas there's a lot of differences even in the white or Caucasian American community. And within those differences, there's respective groups within them or different ethnicities in the United States that are already celebrating their heritage. There's the Italian Americans, there's the Irish Americans, there's the British Americans. They've all celebrated their heritage at one point or another, or continuously still. And so I feel like if the white nationalists are talking about their heritage, what kind of heritage is it? Because when I'm thinking of the Italian Americans, the Irish Americans, the Dutch Americans or whatnot, they're not speaking in the same languages that the white nationalists are speaking. They're not speaking of in these violent terms or these divisive terms. That when they are celebrating their heritage, they're celebrating their contributions to the United States through their own rich history and contributions to the United States from hundreds of years ago. So I feel that we are similar to those groups who want to continue to celebrate like how we are all contributing to the mosaic, this beautiful mosaic that is America, and not the divisive nature or the divisive language that actually promotes hatred, promotes this otherness in a way that is going to tear that mosaic heritage apart.
Okay, thanks, Nadia. Sheetal, I know that HAF does a lot of work along the similar lines. What would you like to tell us about how we address this situation of divisiveness?
Sure. Well, you know, I would say a lot of kind of this divisive rhetoric, white nationalism, any of these, a lot of it's founded in fear. It's fear of the unknown. You know, there's, for all of us sitting here, there's stereotypes about our culture, our background, our heritage. And oftentimes those stereotypes are the things that play into the fear. And so, you know, that's why having conversations like these are so important. And that's why having organizations that are working to educate the public about our various cultures and our traditions are so important. It's one of the reasons we founded, you know, the Hindu American Foundation. I remember my personal story. When I was in 6th grade, I was probably the only Indian Hindu kid in my social studies class, and they got to the Hinduism section of, you know, social studies, and it was appalling. It was that moment where you want to slide under your desk, because they're talking about snake charmers, and they're talking about poverty in India, and they're talking about the caste system, and, you know, how Hindu women burn themselves on fires. And you get in here as a 6th grader and you're like, this is not what I've learned. Like, this is not my tradition. But then, you know, as you progress, you realize that so many children are learning this about my faith and my practice. And I'm sure many of you can speak to this about the way your traditions have been portrayed. And I think that gets to the crux of why we have these issues, this hatred and this divisiveness. Is it comes from a fear of, you know, either these stereotypes or this fear of the unknown. And so I think the more that folks like us can do to go around and educate and promote an accurate and fair representation of our beliefs, our traditions, and our cultures, that's how we can combat these sorts of movements.
Thank you, Sheetal. And speaking of education, I want to go to Jawad next. Jawad, again, please do keep in mind that we have only about 5 to 7 minutes left. So what is MET or you in your personal capacity doing to have this problem of us being considered as aliens solved?
Thank you, Rajiv. And I want to piggyback on what both Nadia and Sheetal said. When Nadia mentioned about the argument, and I've heard this argument before, but I think the argument is flawed in many ways. At its crux, white nationalist, just the diction itself, as Nadia mentioned, otherizes everybody else in a negative way. Whereas somebody celebrating Indonesian Americans or Hindu Americans or Jewish or anything else. It's not divisive against somebody else. It's about the contributions themselves into the country. And I think the Muslim Educational Trust was founded to educate people about the faith itself and to dispel the stereotypes and myths that there are. When Sudo mentioned about learning about Hinduism, I had this very same experience. I think I'm older than she is, though, or I know I'm older than she is by a lot. But when I was in school, about Islam was 2 pages about all of history. And most of it was about what Muslims are against. You don't eat pork, you don't drink alcohol. But most people don't define themselves about what they're against, but what they're for. So what we do is we try to educate. In 2017, there was an incident here on our public transportation. There was a white nationalist, and he had an incident with 2 girls that were on the public transportation. One was African-American, the other one was Muslim, who was wearing a hijab, who was also black. And he started shouting rhetoric at them, "Go back home, you don't belong here." Both of them were born here. And 3 men stood up to defend these 2 young women. And he wound up stabbing all 3. 2 of them died. One of them was badly injured. He recovered. And we ran a campaign on a GoFundMe to support these 3 men and their families for what happened. And we saw this incredible outpouring. $630,000 were raised within a week. Our initial goal was $50,000. So it's about education and what the Muslim Educational Trust does about the values, the ethos of peace and who people are and what they've contributed. And people, when they understand about this, and when people dichotomize things in East is East, West is West, then we get this idea about the racialized others, and it becomes very easy. And for us, for South Asian Muslims, for Muslims, it's very easy to racialize the other because we stand out visually. And so that is then used as a way to say, look, what's going on here? When Angela mentioned about the high achievements about South Asians in Silicon Valley, sometimes even that's used against us. No, you can't face any discrimination because you have the highest household income in the United States. So you don't have any issues like that. So then that's another thing that has to be addressed. As the Muslim Educational Trust, we try to address through education the beauty and the commonalities amongst human beings. And that's at the core, that is at the ethos of this faith. Because like I said, in our community, 45 different races from ethnicities and 72 different languages, all believing and all contributing to this society. So education is key, and demystifying the other and seeing the commonalities that happen throughout history, the melding of cultures and how we learn from one another rather than the otherizing.
Thank you, Jawad. I would like to go to Haipei as well. Please do keep it under a minute if you can. But especially in case of Chinese Americans today, we also see a growing concern about, people use various terms like espionage on the campus or in the labs and whatnot. What is your organization, UCA, or Chinese Americans in general? What are they doing to address this problem of otherness, of the outsider label, so to say, against Chinese Americans?
Right. Thank you for that question. That otherness is a big problem, I think, not with Chinese, but with Asian American in general. I think we have that unique problem ours. Chinese American have been here in this country ever since 1840 in large numbers. And until today, we're still very much viewed as foreigners. And especially when there are issues and when political tension is high, when economy is going down, issues like that has happened several cycles in American history. Now, right now, Chinese American community is going through a very tough time because of U.S.-China relations. Honestly, you could think about this 20 years or even less from today, when the Indian economy is growing fantastic, keep growing. You could have a U.S.-Indian problem too because of that. So these things, country-to-country relations is one thing, but when we have been here in this country for so long and we're still viewed as agent of China, it's some of the things is unbelievable. I'll give you Congressman Andy Kim, Korean Americans, right? A fantastic veteran diplomat, Rhodes Scholar, all of that, PhD on international relations and growing up in this country. And when he come back from Afghanistan, and he got a notice out of nowhere saying that, more or less to the extent that you can do anything in State Department, but not touch Korean issues, right? So it's very offensive, in fact. And why a Korean American, a Rhodes Scholar, a diplomat, and serving Afghanistan cannot touch Korean issues? That's the very issue that we come this with otherness. So the deep down on that level, on national security, we're not trusted. And that's why when I see Canada a few years ago, that the new government, after the election, a sick Canadians with all this turbine on the head can become a defense minister of Canada, I say to myself, that country, finally, that is a living proof for me, a milestone for that. We haven't come across that milestone in this country yet. Thanks.
Thank you, Haipei. I think you have reminded us of what our neighbors to the north are able to achieve, which I think we have long ways still to go on. With that, folks, while I was not naive enough to think we'll be able to boil the ocean today, I personally think that between these diverse organizations and individuals that we were able to bring together today, this is a good start of our starting to understand each other, but also to start building a narrative of how we can work together. I want to thank the Asian American Unity Coalition and National Civic Leadership Forum for putting this conference together. On behalf of the Hindu American Foundation, HAF, I would like to thank SK Low and others in the organization to provide us this opportunity, and obviously to all the panelists here for participating. Let us consider this to be a start of the conversation. We need to find more forums, perhaps build them here and build our own to carry this conversation in the future. But this is a good start. Thank you for being here and all the best. Have a great weekend. Thank you, everybody.